First wave feminists, yes, want women to have the right to work, but for women to be able to work outside, there should be some regulations at home. For example, they don't talk about this. They just want the right to work. The Republic has a claim like this. We have no choice but to be superstitious, to be civilized. Civilization is also one. It is Western civilization, and we will take everything from this civilization. Yes, and there are those who say it openly. In other words, women should go home. Job opportunities should be vacated, male unemployment should decrease. This is why families fall apart. Women started earning money. This is why they became more rebellious. They became more like this, more like that.
Hello everyone from Istanbul School. Dear audience, today we will talk about women's rights and achievements in the Republic period. Our guest is Dr. Hidayet Şefkatli Tuksal. Welcome, teacher. How are you?
You're welcome. Thank God I'm fine. It's better since I saw you.
Thank you very much. You accepted our invitation once again.
Thank you, and I thank you for your kind invitation.
In our previous program, we talked a little bit about women's rights and women's movements. There were women's movements that started in the Ottoman Empire, movements that started all over the world and that we saw in the Ottoman Empire. How did these continue after the Republic? Did they continue? What kind of effects were shown? Can you talk a little bit about these?
Of course. In the last periods of the Ottoman Empire, there were very complicated times. There were wars and so on. In other words, the women's movement had created an important area of discussion and had actually gained the appreciation and support of the intellectuals, the palace, the administrators. And we had also said that the most important feature of the women's movement of that period was this. In other words, religion was not somewhere outside the discussion. Because religion is an important means of legitimization in society, women often drew on religion, verses, hadiths, different interpretations and details of belief systems to articulate their demands, perhaps reinterpreting some of them and challenging traditional understandings. After the establishment of the Republic of Turkey, women were determined to continue on their path to achieve their social rights and freedoms. In fact, Nezihe Muhittin and her friends immediately founded a women's party in 1924, wrote its program and submitted their petition for the opening and acceptance of this party. This was actually a very brave step and the tipping point, because in the Ottoman Empire these demands for the right to vote and be elected were being voiced. But even something like this. When the Parliament I Mebusan was opening for the second time in 1908, at that time the suffragette movement in England was very strong and they were doing a lot of protests. Our women also sent a message. Well, we also want to be active in this parliament. We want to see its opening. In other words, if you do not accept our demands, we will start protesting like the suffragettes, they said. Then there is a tolerance for the women's movement. In other words, even if they criticize, even those who criticize admit the issues that women are right about. Everyone is aware that something needs to change. In such an atmosphere, the Republic of Turkey was actually established. The Grand National Assembly was established, but of course the War of Independence continued, so there was a war environment. For example, we see Halide Edip Adivar in this war environment. Women are holding meetings. They are making speeches here. This is not something that was customary in the Ottoman Empire, and they are not doing this for women's rights. They are doing it for the homeland. They are doing a variety of actions. Halide Edip is coming to Anatolia for the war. She wants to join the war and is constantly writing to Western newspapers that the Turkish armies... He gives information about the movement, establishes contact with them, etc. There is such a thing. And even later on, he continues with the rank of a corporal, that is, such an active... Women are also being trained in this format that perhaps women could not have thought of until then. Of course, the women who carried bullets on the front, or the women who produced laundry for the soldiers, and also In other words, not only educated women, but all women supported the war. Such an atmosphere is, of course, great losses. A new republic. A new republic means a new hope, and women are also hopeful and dream of a level more advanced than the Ottomans. Because there is such a core, such an enthusiasm in the newly established republic, they are aware of this. But, for whatever reason, there are of course factors such as the opposition of the deputies in the parliament, especially the conservative deputies, especially the issue of women's right to vote, social norms, and traditional approaches. But I guess we look at it, the elite generation of the new republic are after all Ottoman pashas. So women's such maverickry is a bit intimidating for them.
In other words, even though the form has changed, they are actually the same people and their mentality is the same.
So yes, they want women to be modernized, they want them to study and work, but they don't want them to be independent.
They don't want them to be too spoiled, so to speak.
Yes, I mean, we see that they think like that because they don't allow the establishment of such a party. But the following is being done. In every field, women's rights, especially social rights, that is, the Republic has a claim like this. We have no choice but to be westernized, to be civilized, and civilization is one. It is Western civilization. And we will adopt this civilization in everything, culturally and scientifically. You know, this debate was already going on during the Ottoman period. Some of them were saying, no, we will only take the technical and scientific part of it. Our religious conservatives. The Westernist section said, no, we need to take it with everything. After the founding of the Republic, this group became more dominant and they wanted to take civilization with everything. They wanted to make social Turkey a civilized country. Women were given a big role here. An acceptable woman model was created. This acceptable woman model has a profession. A lot of social and revolutionary things became possible in the new republic, such as dressing like Westerners, living like Western women, working or having fun together, that is free, independent, I don't know, dancing with men at a ball, or, I don't know, a woman becoming a judge at work, which the old traditional religious codes did not consider appropriate for a woman. There was a mobilization for women's education. In other words, literacy courses were opened, especially after the alphabet revolution. Courses were opened where everyone had to learn the Latin alphabet because of the sudden change in the alphabet. On the other hand, since the population had fallen so much, women were encouraged to have children, in other words, so that the population would increase. So educational moves, economic moves, moves in agriculture, etc. While on the one hand the country was being developed, on the other hand a new Turkey model was being built through the new generation of youth raised in schools. Women were also given an important role here. Women accepted this role willingly, but the traditional religious segments did not accept these developments. They especially perceived this evolution of women towards the Western female model as a threat, a danger. So they protested in some way by not sending their daughters to schools, staying away from this community, living in a closed style. They did not participate. Therefore, the ones who benefited from these new initiatives, those who had a profession, became teachers, etc., were generally urban women. Later, through village institutes opened in the villages, or through boarding schools opened in towns or some cities instead of villages, girls were also recruited from the villages, but this generally created discontent. Therefore, since the beginning of the Republic, the issue of women has always been a symbol and a subject of debate between the religious and Western elites. In other words, one side sees women's role as the dynamics of progress, but in a Western model. On the other hand, one side has always said, no, it is not going to happen with women's dressing up or working outside. Women's main duty is motherhood. You are taking them away from their original nature. Imitation is one thing, Western imitation, for example, the criticisms at that time. You are creating a model of women imitating the West. Of course, it was not only women who imitated the West at that time, but also men. The issue of women continued as a symbolic subject of conflict among these discussions, and some of the Ataturk revolutions were extremely as something that offered opportunities, as progress, while others saw it as a sign of a kind of gentrification. This rivalry lasted for a century, but still, there were people who had professions, many different professions. First of all, teaching, and again in other traditional female professions, doctors and judges were trained. Women were raised in every field. This republic raised something like this. There were those who called it a kind of state feminism. And actually there is an interpretation like this. In other words, a generation of women grew up who were grateful to Ataturk.
Yes, the women of the Republic who are grateful to Ataturk. We have gained all our rights, such as the right to education, the right to vote, etc., thanks to him, and we are grateful to him. It is as if he brought us to this situation. In fact, when we look at the framework from a more external perspective, there has been a similar progress and movement all over the world. Maybe we can look at it from this perspective as well.
Yes, for example, Ataturk's wife, Latife Hanim. She was an extremely feminist woman. For example, she was a woman who was criticized by those around her because she had an egalitarian relationship with Ataturk. That is, because she called her husband Kemal. I mean, they probably expected her to call her Pasha or something. I mean, maybe this is the reason for their marriages not working out. After all, women's freedoms and rights are not so easily accepted by the male world. Even if they were, there was a pressure that they should be under our guidance in the way we draw them. In the end, something like that happened, but was it bad? I don't like this much Western mimicry either. I mean, it could have been something where more traditional codes were taken into consideration. I mean, this is what we call a revolution. In other words, it was a period that was done for the people despite the people. Its pains have been pains that have lasted until today. We established the republic, but we couldn't move on to democracy. We could never move to participatory democracy. Everything that came to us came from above. We also experienced the pains of this.
But wasn't an internal transformation very difficult at that time? That is, yes, it occurred from the outside, through imitation, perhaps through a top-down attitude, but wasn't it much more difficult to achieve this transformation spontaneously, both by preserving our culture and by adopting our own internal conditions?
It was difficult, but because we didn't try it, we don't know how possible it would be because we didn't try it. In other words, the elite of that day chose such a method because they thought it wouldn't be possible. Not only because they thought it wouldn't be possible, but also because they wanted to develop very fast. In other words, we fell behind. We have to achieve everything very quickly. This urgency psychology, this urgency thing prevents thinking about and considering other things. Also, yes, all of these people are soldiers, pashas. They are used to giving orders. In other words, listening, for example, the Sun language theory emerged, the Turkish history thesis emerged. Even when these emerged, they were not produced by asking historians, linguists. In other words, historians or linguists, some of them support it, but some of them say that such a thing cannot happen, etc. Those who said such a thing cannot happen were immediately discredited by the government, for example, at that time. In other words, no objection was liked. Therefore, yes, the Sultanate system was a system of oppression, etc. But in other words, the first years of the Republic were not any less than the Sultanate.
There was an attitude of, let's take whatever we have and modernize as soon as possible. When we look at the second wave of women's movements, the movements after 1960, what did they look like? How did they reflect on our day? How do you see it now?
That's how we closed the first wave. After that, in Turkey, the activities of these Ataturkist women's associations, Ataturkist women, the single-party government of the Republican People's Party were actually projects that aimed to send girls to school or to take this modernization to the villages through village chambers and community centers. But because it was done by force, it was as much as it could be. After that, Turkey experienced different periods politically. In World War II, Turkey initially remained neutral. After the Second World War, the world took a new line and Turkey repositioned itself politically. Here, of course, it was positioned along the lines of America and the Western states on the American axis. With the multi-party era, religious groups, those groups that had been hiding in the corner, started to emerge slowly in terms of freedom, equality, women's rights, socially and politically, and again in this period, the issue of women continued to be a battleground between these Westerners and the religious. In that period, religious women were still living their traditional lives. Maybe we can talk about this in another topic. But when we look at the women's movement, religious women are not aware of the women's movement either. They are far away from these things. After 60, there was a period of great right-left political conflict, especially in Turkey. During this period, leftist women were very active, but they all viewed feminism as enemies and were generally involved in socialist movements because they thought that socialism would bring equality for women. However, what happened in the West after the 1980 coup, that is, after the 60s, did not come to us so suddenly. It came after the 80s, towards the 90s, with a delay of almost 30 years. Because after the 1980 coup, of course, the prisons were full, the left movement was banned, and so on. In other words, the left organizations and so on. And the women who were constantly fighting for equality at work and revolution in these left organizations suddenly found themselves idle. And during that period, a new area of discussion emerged in Turkey through women who were following the West and were aware of the developments of that second wave feminism in the West. There were also reasons that triggered this. For example, in a court case, a judge said to a woman who had applied to court because she had been subjected to violence by her husband, "There is a saying in our tradition, you should not leave a woman's back with a stick and a colt with her belly without a colt. Therefore, it is normal for your husband to beat you." This was reflected in the newspapers. Then there was another case news of this kind. Then our second wave started to revive in Turkey and a women's march was held against beatings. Violence against women became something. In other words, it became a fundamental issue for women. And women's lives in private spheres, not public rights, started to occupy the agenda of feminism. But there is also something in this. In other words, there was also a generation of women who had grown up as bureaucrats, as university professors, or, I don't know, as professional women. In other words, these women are somehow connected to the world. There are various meetings held at the United Nations. Various things come out. In other words, after the war, Europe and the West were constantly asking, how can we develop standards under the motto of human rights? How can we live in a better world? How can we live without fighting again? It was an important period that passed with great effort. The reflection of this on women was that women organized in the United Nations, there for all women of the world, for all women of the world, to identify both local problems and problems they shared and to produce effective solutions for them. There was a great motivation to implement these effective solutions through governments and civil society organizations. In 1985, the Convention on Preventing All Kinds of Discrimination Against Women was accepted. After that, the Convention on Preventing Violence Against Women, etc. These were the issues that our segment, these educated women who were university professors in Turkey knew, learned through the meetings they attended and wanted to carry Turkey to. Thus, the second wave of feminism began in Turkey, and it started very quickly. And there was a military coup in 1980. Everything was forbidden, but no ban was placed on the women's movement. Thus, meetings, going abroad, attending meetings abroad, bringing the results of those to Turkey, discussions with various groups here, such a lively thing began. The women's movement began. Thus it came.
So here, as you said, the movement seems to have been revived by focusing more on violence against women, their domestic situations, and problems related to women being mothers and wives rather than the public sphere.
Yes, of course, because it's like this. First wave feminism wants women to have the right to work, but for women to be able to work outside, there needs to be some regulations at home. For example, it doesn't talk about this, it just wants the right to work. They want the right to education, but when we look at women's education, women are directed more towards traditional professions. For example, being an engineer is not seen as very suitable for women. Even getting medical education in the West is something that happened after a long struggle. They were not accepting women to medical schools. After all, those struggles were also fought in the West. Here's the second wave. Okay, women will do these. In other words, women will work. Women will be educated. So what will women do while doing these jobs as wives and mothers? Will they be torn into 1,000 pieces? Or will we reorganize life? How will mechanisms that help women be established? In fact, this is a legacy left by the socialist movement, because in the first wave of feminism, socialist women were rejecting feminism. They saw it as a bourgeois women's movement. And they were saying, well, women and men are equal. Women can live like men. All of the responsibilities of women in the house should be shared with common things. In other words, laundromats should be set up in every neighborhood. Dining halls should be set up in every neighborhood. Creches should be set up. Women should be included in the labor market by leaving their children in the creche, eating in the dining hall when they come in the evening, and having their laundry washed in the laundromat. Otherwise, they would say this is not a life by doing all those jobs and working outside.
It's a great system, by the way. I wish it had been implemented because it's still a problem area. Right now, yes, everyone supports women working. Everyone says yes, work. Sometimes housewives are even belittled because they don't contribute to the home, because they don't work outside, etc. Sometimes we can even see this movement being followed in the opposite direction, but no one offers a solution for where a working woman will leave her child or asks if her dinner will be ready when she returns home in the evening. Supporting her together through a systematic solution like this will of course lead to completely different results.
Yes, but they tried this in Russia, but it was not as successful as desired, because they also went to war. So poverty and of course the male-dominated mentality is not something that changes easily. In other words, it changes its appearance. It happens like this. For example, in Russia, yes, space was opened for women. In fact, these things were tried to be established, these support mechanisms, but the result is as follows. In other words, men have completely withdrawn from family work. In other words, okay, are we going to do it now? We don't have much responsibility like fatherhood or husbandhood. Then, for example, women started to have problems with this. In other words, if a generation is going to continue, if this is going to continue through families, some mechanisms need to be established. The labor of women who work at home, who are considered women who do not work by being called housewives, has also been problematized a lot by feminist women, especially by women who come from socialist feminism, and it has been said that Marx cared about labor so much. In other words, labor is the most sacred thing for socialists, but he said nothing about women's labor. In other words, he said nothing about the labor that women spend at home. How will this labor's due, be paid? For example, they made it very responsible. They produced various formulas. this labor being provided jointly by family members, this is one solution. Or the provision of these services by the state, this is the second solution. We have heard that the third solution is implemented in some countries, but I don't know the details. Remuneration of women's labor in the home. In other words, the house is at home with the woman because with the effort you put in, your children go to school and try to grow up as qualified people for this country. With the effort you put in, your husband can come home in the evening and relax in front of the TV. He can go to work in the morning with his mind at ease. Therefore, as an individual who works for the development of the country, you have done all of his back-end work. Therefore, suggestions were made for this labor to be somehow transformed into a wage paid by the state. In other words, but in Turkey, many men who can stomach talking about this and other things get extremely emotional when it comes to talking about this woman's labor in the house. And in other words, they get into a mode like this. I mean, how can a mother's labor be thought of as something monetary? I mean, can it have a monetary equivalent? I mean, this is such a sacred thing that how can you think of it as a commercial commodity? Okay, of course it is a sacred labor, but please, I mean, participate in this sacredness a little bit.
Then we will give a holy response.
So yes, then say that housewives are above our heads. How will we show respect? How will we reward this effort? Then go into that a little bit.
In other words, if they do not think about the financial reward, they need to show the value of it in some way by showing it to the public and holding it in high regard.
But unfortunately, there is not. So many women, especially women of my age or a little older, who have raised their children and married, who have devoted their lives to their children, who have devoted their lives to their homes, are now unhappy. Why are they unhappy? Because they cannot see a return on their emotional investment, their physical investment, their investment of time, because young people have this psychology. I mean, okay, yes, parents, yes, it was their duty. Yes, they did it. Yes, it's done. There is no reason for me to feel indebted or grateful. They did their duty. Even, I mean, they couldn't do it. I was lacking this, I was that. I mean, such a psychology. I mean, in the past, they used to be in a position of respect as an old woman. That doesn't exist now either. Hello, Mom, do you have food? Let's come. Hello, there's a child to look after. Come and see. So they are still in the mode of being put to work, but the appreciation part is always God's appreciation. It is left there.
Yes, we'll leave it there. If we can't find a reward in this world, let's say that I hope Allah will reward us for our efforts.
That's why feminists have focused on this a lot. For example, in Turkey, women's participation in employment has actually been a policy supported by governments. Although our religious conservatives always oppose this, even ministers have said, yes, there is unemployment because women came and men became unemployed.
Yes, one of the most talked about things is that they see this as a reason to cover up their own unemployment or other situations, as if we have taken up all men's workspace and left no place for any man to work.
Yes, and there are those who openly say that women should go home, so that workplaces become empty, so that male unemployment decreases. That's why families are already falling apart. That's why women started earning money, so they became more rebellious, they became more like this, they became more like that. The interesting thing is that when a man asks for a divorce, no one stands up to him and says, wait a minute, what's going on? They even ask the DNet. Is it valid if a man divorces his wife through a phone message? The DNet answers, yes, it is valid. I mean, what does it mean to divorce a woman by phone message? How is it valid? Where do you live? You live in the Republic of Turkey. So you have to go to court here to get a divorce. You will explain the reason for the divorce, etc. There is nothing on these points. All the rules of fiqh are applied. Well, once the word divorce comes out of her mouth, the divorce is realized. And after that, the cost, burden, social and legal effects, children in the past. Yes, women used to get divorced, but they would leave their children with their husbands. They would go and marry another man. That's how they continued their lives. Now we see that women have the children, alimony is paid or not paid with all kinds of whining, or there are campaigns, women's rights are defended, we want justice, we want to pay alimony for life, and so on. So in the end, without addressing the grievances of women in any way, without considering the grievances of women, men try to get out of everything perfectly. I mean, some men. Of course, I don't mean all of them. After all, there are victims from every segment. I mean, there are also victims from men in such matters. I accept that. But when we look at the average in Turkey, women are the ones who raise and take care of the children in divorced couples. Men can marry a second time very quickly and completely abandon their first marriage. They are giving up. I mean, we come across these a lot. In this case, of course, the state needs to take precautions.
Unfortunately, in this way, women bear the burden of both marriage and divorce.
Yes, I mean, unfortunately.
Let's say I hope there will be a regulation, etc., on this issue.
Well, I mean, women are already trying for such arrangements, but generally, the legitimizing power of religion, I mean, those who drive the latest model cars made here and there in Europe. In other words, those who use Western means of transportation in everything they do. Those who study in Western countries, that is, many religious men who see no harm in relating to the West in any other way when it comes to women.
He becomes religious.
I mean, there will be nothing Western here. I mean, here it will be completely traditional, completely Eastern. It will be like 1500 years ago. They are dreaming of such a thing. Unfortunately,
Teacher, unfortunately, I can't find anything to say. Thank you very much for your valuable comments. Let's end with good wishes and say that I hope this will come to an end.
yes, I mean something like this. I always tell my students that behind every right you are using right now, there is a huge women's labor and a huge women's struggle. None of these things even came to you from the ground, from the sky. I mean, yes, religions may have given some rights to women, but women fought bravely even to use them. So please protect your rights. It is not that you claim your rights by being unfair to others. I mean, claim your rights in a fair way. Do not belittle them. Do not be unfair. And don't be wronged. Have confidence in yourself and remember that you are an individual. Because our religion treats women as individuals. Equality is the most important thing, so no one will answer to Allah together with her husband. She will not give an account about him. Everyone will be accountable for their own life adventure. Therefore, we need to learn to be individuals.
Thank you very much, teacher. Thank you very much for your valuable comments.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, today we talked about women's rights and women's movements that changed and developed with the Republic. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.